Tara just tried to trip me. Okay, let's just start this off. Hi, welcome back to The Experience. I am Sarah, and today we're talking about succulent care. I heard you. I'm giving you what you want. Here we go. The first tip that I would like to share about succulent care is to look up and try to identify, to the best you can, what specific kind of succulent you have. There's so many different kinds of succulents out there, and there's so many more that constantly keep coming out, it seems like, that it's really important to know what kind you're dealing with because they all have very different types of care. Although, like, yes, they are very similar. As far as where they're native to, it's usually desert, terrain, dry climate, not a lot of rainfall. That's important to know when you're trying to care for the plant long term, because if you don't give it what it's used to and what it needs, it will not thrive. But everyone's plants are going to be different in the place that they're caring for it as well. So it's important to also analyze your surroundings and your environment, because each plant is going to need a different amount of sunlight, and it's important that you're going to be able to give that to it, or if you're able to place it somewhere different because it needs maybe slightly less light but bright, just get to know your plants, look it up, learn its love language, so to speak, because like people, plants like different things, and one thing that would make one plant really happy will literally kill another one. So it's just important to know. Another tip is to know how much water your succulent is going to need, because some succulents can go off of a roughly one watering a week kind of schedule, whereas others, I have some that I water one every few months, and it needs to be only watered every few months. So it's just, it can be that drastic of you need to kind of neglect that plant because otherwise it will die. They live in the desert, if you overwater it. That's the number one killer of succulents, is overwatering, across the board. So definitely know how often and pay attention to your plant to see how much it needs watered, and they will tell you when they need water. The leaves start to look wrinkled and they're deflating when they need more water, but I would honestly say you'll get to know how often it really needs watered if you just let it get to that point one time. Just keep in mind oh wow, it took a month for it to get wilted. This is a jade that I rescued from a local grocery store because it was so sad and falling out of its little, it was in this big of a pot, and it had this many roots. And look at it now. Look at it, it's a monster. So I have forgotten about this one for a long time. It's thirsty, and that's what it looks like here. So you'll see, let me show you. See these sad wrinkly leaves here? See how you can tell it's textured and wrinkly, and also you can see they're super floppy. Succulents are not supposed to do that. She's gonna get a good watering, but for some plants it really does matter how you're watering it. So for example, begonias don't like it, and African violets don't like it when you put water onto their leaves. They prefer it to just be put directly onto the soil, because the water on the leaves can actually promote diseases on the plant. But for some plants, they don't mind a little bit of splash of water on their leaves because they like that humidity that comes off of it. Succulents, I would say, fall into the realm of they don't need any excess humidity or water onto their leaves. However, it won't harm them if you water right onto the leaves. It just won't really stick. It'll kind of bead off, and you'll notice that, and that's normal. Where they're native to, it doesn't often rain on them, so they've kind of built up their methods of gathering humidity, and it's usually from the water that they receive through the root system. So you can water right onto the soil, but some of the succulents I have, like this one, you'll see it has all these little, it kind of all leads into the center. So if you pour the water right onto the plant, it'll kind of gather itself all into the soil really direct. It's actually really helpful when I'm watering. It just kind of funnels itself right into the pot. On that note, also, I wouldn't recommend misting or spraying your succulents because, as I said, it they don't really require high humidity, essentially, but if you're storing them around other plants you are misting, it won't harm them. It just also won't really boost their growth either. It's up to you. There's some that I have not watered through the entirety of the last few seasons, I'm not going to lie to you, so. And they're doing fine. You see them here. This, I've not watered that for so long. It has grown like stretched because it needs to be closer to the light source. If you notice your succulent looking like this, that means that it needs to be moved closer to the light source. So either the window or your grow light or what have you. If it gets all stretched out like this, it's going to need some more light. On average, the best place to keep a succulent is near a window, but it definitely depends on what kind of succulent it is as to how much direct light it's going to want, or if it wants direct light at all, because some will just like really bright light but no direct sunlight. Some that have vibrant colors will have more color, either depending on if it has more light or less light, and with each different kind of succulent, it definitely is different whether it needs more or less for the color to come through. So again, identify your succulents. If you don't like how this looks, you want to correct it, you can just chop off this top part, the little rosette, that's what they're called. This looks like a rose, this little rosette. Let's focus. Yeah, little rosette. So it will, if you cut it, say here, like right underneath, and you tear off the leaves and you stick that into the soil, it will root over time. It takes like months, and I'm not exaggerating, it takes months. Don't look at it, don't pull it out of the soil, throw some water on there every now and then. Don't sog the soil down, like just lightly water all succulents most of the time. But it will eventually put out little roots and it'll just grow like this. And if you move it closer to the light source, it won't go back to growing like this. It'll stay like compact. Thank you. As you can see up here, since it doesn't get enough water through the soil, it is now putting out little roots up here. You see that little root? It's just like a little white kind of string. And that's what it would do if you chopped it and wanted to put it into soil. Some tips that I don't really hear talked about too often in these kinds of videos is rotation of the plant, because as most plants do, it'll start growing towards the light source. And if you want it to have a more evened out, balanced growth pattern, as it really should, you'll just want to rotate it just a little bit every so often. You'll start to notice it straightening back up again, but don't do it too drastic at a time because you want it to be even all around the plant. So just pay attention to that. Alright, so for me, with moving succulents from pot to pot or from nursery pot to, say, your at-home decorative or just more permanent pot, I would not recommend moving unless they are root bound or almost filling the soil and pot that they're in currently. They don't do well when they're moved into a large piece of soil unless they have the roots to fill it. So they're often found in their native environments, like in cracks, amongst rocks. They generally don't thrive in a huge, just like, bit of soil. So unless it's bursting out of the pot or you notice that it is drinking water way faster than normal, that generally means that it's ready for a slightly bigger pot. But I say slightly, and I mean that. So like one pot size up an inch or so by an inch or so more. Because that way they won't feel like they have to put all their energy into their root growth, and they can continue thriving on top on the foliage. A drainage pot or a drainage hole is essentially just a hole in the bottom of the pot to allow water to flow freely through so that the plant is not sitting in this big puddle of water. Say you put a little too much water in the pot, because that will immediately kill a succulent. They really cannot handle having too much water in their system, because what you see on top as the leaves or the foliage, that is entirely holding all of the water that it will need. So they are used to long periods of drought, therefore they have to store up their water to survive through that long potential period of time. So if you give them too much water, they'll just self-destruct. I just want to show this off. Cover my face. Look at that. It is blooming. Here, I'll get out of the shot. Look. It's blooming. I know this is weird. So this is a fun example of what a succulent bloom looks like. This is a dead bloom that has passed on already. I'm just going to pull it off gently. It just pulls right out like that. And this is a Haworthia cooperi, and it is, I mentioned it in my first video, this is the pointed form because, as I said, my beautiful round form has passed on. But this guy's going strong, and for an example, I purchased it in this pot, and it pushes out, here, also, sorry, let me finish one thought. It pushes out these little babies, so you can see, like, there's the main stalk, and then there's this little baby right here, and there's another one right here, and it'll probably keep pushing them out, and you can just pop these little things out, like, I know this is gonna sound like crazy, but you can literally just, you hear that crack, and then it just pops out. Just pops right out. And you can stick that right in the soil, like that, and it'll just grow. Isn't that crazy? Anyways, this has now turned into a lot more than I expected it to, but it's a little root right here, and maybe you can kind of see it if I tilt, I don't know. It will start growing out into a water drinking root if you put it into the soil, which I will do now because I ripped this thing off the mother plants. Sorry, it didn't ask to be born, but I just said, you're alive now. I purchased this plant in this pot over a year and a half ago, and it's doing fine, and it's pushed out babies, and it's bloomed every year I've had it, so it's happy, which is why I have not moved it into a new pot, because it doesn't seem to need it. And I'm just cleaning up these dead leaves in here, which I recommend, because the less, this goes for all plants, the less dead plant matter that's hanging out in your pot, the less disease that might happen to your plant. So just do like a general little cleanup every time you like observe the plant, and you won't ever have to worry about that kind of thing. And now it's all clean. It'll have more room for light and everything, so it's just an all-around good idea to clean up your dead leaves. Say you overwater your succulent, you know you just dumped a bunch of water in there and it doesn't have a drainage hole, and you're like, what can I do? I neglect this succulent more than all the other ones, but it's popping off. That's what I mean. They don't care if you forget about them. They prefer it, actually. I really relate to succulents. Anyways, so if you overwater your succulent, you'll want to, what I do is I'll put my hands kind of like to stabilize the plant itself. So you can see I'm like putting my fingers through and holding it, and mostly what the point of this is to cover the soil so that when I dump it over like this into the sink, because there's far too much water in there, the soil is not going to come flying out, the plant's going to stay in the pot. So that's the first thing you'll want to do, but after that, that's not enough, because all of the soil in here has sopped up so much water that it can still overwater your succulent over time, which you wouldn't even know is happening. So you'll want to take like a some kind of little stick, or like chopsticks I use, honestly, because we get takeout all the time, so chopsticks are really great for plants and plant care. But you'll just take a chopstick and you'll just lightly dig up the soil and like kind of fluff the soil, so to speak. You know how you fluff like couscous. You're gonna fluff the soil so it allows more airflow into the soil, which will aerate it. That's what it's called, is aerating the soil, which will essentially help it dry faster. So it's more air from different directions instead of just the one on top and like the rest of the soil is just sopping wet, you know? And that's what I'd recommend for overwatering. If you see your succulent starting to get root rot, like you know it's been overwatered, and you can start to see what honestly I notice happening as the stalk starts to shrivel up, which does not happen if it needs watered. The leaves will shrivel if it needs watered, the stalk will shrivel if it's being overwatered. So you'll want to, honestly, the best way to fix it, you're going to chop that succulent off at the tip. You're going to want to cut off, say this jade here got some root rot, okay? This stalk, say it's starting to shrivel up. You can tell it's just not happy. You'll cut it up here and you'll reroot it down like I discussed with this one here. You'll stick it into the soil. You'll remove some of the lower leaves first, so because wherever a leaf grows on a succulent, it holds the growth enzymes for roots. So you'll tear off the lower, not all of the leaves of the plant because then it can't produce energy. So you'll just remove some of the lower leaves and then you stick it in the soil and you'll give it little bits of water every now and then, and it again will take a long time, but it will put out new roots and you'll have saved that plant. Don't overwater it again. I think I've been lucky with not having a lot of issues with pests in my succulents. However, there was the time with the other Horathia cooperi that had aphids, and I don't know where the aphids came from. It's possible it always had aphids. Like I brought it home from the greenhouse and it had aphids, and I just didn't see it because greenhouses often use pesticides. So, but it doesn't kill. It'll kill off sometimes the adult pest or the larva of the pest or the egg of the pest, but not often all of them. So you can buy a plant that does have some like lurking, not so friendly friends down there in the soil, and if you start to notice, usually pests are different. I don't need to get into that right here, but aphids look like little kind of dewdrops, like kind of a creamy, milky green, yellow, and they just latch onto your plant and they just suck the moisture out of it until it dies. But I was just rinsing off the aphids as much as I could because I just didn't know how to approach it at the time. So it perished. I'll get another. It's okay. But to avoid pests, I would say just keep your plants, like I said, the pots clean. Get rid of those empty. Get rid of the dead leaves and be careful to not overwater again because a lot of pests can flock to too wet of soil. Like fungus gnats are little like wispy gnats that live in the soil. They feed off of the microbial fungi in the soil. They love a wet soil. So especially with succulents, your soil does not need to be wet, like at all, almost ever. So you shouldn't have to worry about those. But best of luck to you. I've not had a lot of experience with pests on succulents, thank goodness. So that's all I have. You want to talk soil? The types of soil I recommend for succulents is, what I do is 20% potting soil with oh my gosh, perlite, oh my goodness. Okay. With perlite in it. Oh, I cannot, I have to keep that in, that's so ridiculous. Okay. Can't help I'm so witchy, you guys. I skipped my witchy video to give you the succulent video first, and I just want you to know that that's because I care about you. All 21 of you, shout out to 21 of you, thanks for that, by the way. Anyways, 20% potting soil with perlite and, I'm trying to math, this is pathetic, 30% cacti slash succulent slash just a sandy, really fine soil. And then the remainder I do orchid mix, which actually contains like thick bark, charcoal, coconut coir, just a bunch of blends of things, and that helps to balance out the two different other soils that are in there, because the potting soil is going to really maintain the moisture almost too much. That's why I use the least of it. But then the really sandy fine soil is going to kind of bead. It takes a lot to actually get that to absorb the water, and so the kind of like chunkiness and coarseness of the orchid mixture helps it to kind of weigh it down, hold it down, so that the soil does all absorb the water. But then also I'd like to mention, though, if you're going to use mostly the sandy soil, to put a thin layer of fine little rocks, little pebbles on the top, because that will help weigh it down, as I said, and it'll give the water space to sit while the soil can absorb it, and it'll be less messy that way. Just a forewarning. That's all you guys get. That's enough. I've talked about succulents for so long. I think that's everything. That's all the questions. You leave more questions and then I'll answer those. Thanks for watching this video. Please comment if you have any questions. I would love to make more and to go more into tips, especially about succulents, but also other kinds of plants. So just comment and do the thumbs up, and see you next time. Bye!